Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. My name is Fahad Shokat, and my co host is Andrew Wolf, CEO of SkipList. This podcast is all about building incredible and thoughtful software. In this episode, we were fortunate enough to speak with Brett Cummings, CEO of Left Coast Ventures, about a widely debated topic, cannabis. And so, Left Coast Ventures' vision is to bring consumers innovative cannabis products that disrupt the global CPG market. Their mission is to build, invest in, or acquire a significant piece of the cannabis value chain in the US. And Brett most recently served as partner and CFO of venture capital firm 8VC and raised and managed over $3 billion in 7 years. This episode is packed full of detailed information on the cannabis industry. We discuss the various opportunities and challenges. We also get into regulation and where tech comes into this industry. It was a truly insightful episode from Brett. We were very thankful. So here's Brett giving us an intro. So we hope you enjoy. Here we go.
Yeah, so Left Coast Ventures is a private equity holding company focused on legal cannabis in the United States. We started as a subsidiary of Privateer Holdings. Privateer started 8 years ago. 3 founders, traditional business folks, came and saw kind of the long-term writing on the wall that cannabis was going to be legal in the U.S. and in the world broadly. And so, kind of fast forward, what they've done over the past year was extremely difficult. They started a company called Tilray in Canada. And that is focused on the medical and now recreational market, primarily in Canada, but they're also in now 8 countries, I believe, focused on legal cannabis. And they went public on the NASDAQ last year, which is pretty incredible since they're operating legally in those worldwide markets. So they can't have any THC touching assets in the US. They bought a little company at the time called Leafly, which is the Yelp of strain and dispensaries, now moving more into basically a marketplace. They have an IP and branding entity, which was, in-license the Marley Natural name and creates a bunch of other products and brands. And then we license them down here into California. And then the other entity that started was called Landseye. And that's the entity that I acquired and took over into Left Coast Ventures, focused on middle of the supply chain production and distribution of cannabis products. So through acquisition and some investment of our own, create new products, we can now produce flower products, I think 8 in jars, pre-rolls, gram bags. We do vape carts with vaporized oil. We do edibles, we have chocolate, hard candies, chews. We have hemp CBD and THC and cannabis CBD topical products, think tinctures, bath bombs, and we recently launched a Cannabrew, so a non-alcoholic beer that has a special type of THC technology in it, so that the oil mixes with the liquid.
Oh wow!
So end of the day, we are focused right now on just California, looking at taking this playbook to other states if the right opportunity presents itself.
So maybe you can explain why there's such a expansion of like different products within cannabis. What happened to just like smoking a joint? Why do you have candies and beer and you have all kinds of stuff now?
Yeah, great question. I think if you look at California, it's the most mature cannabis market in the world. You look at Humboldt and even Santa Barbara and Salinas and those areas, they've been growing cannabis for decades. And it was always, flower, and then oil came on just in the last couple of years. But if you think about the people that can benefit from cannabis, and so obviously you have the recreational side. Friday night, you want to sit and watch a funny movie and giggle a bit. But at the end of the day, I think cannabis and CBD and the entourage effect between all the cannabinoids can help so many more people. And, in your community, I'm sure you can think of a lot of people who have anxiety or trouble sleeping, and they're not going to go out and pack a bowl or, pop out their back door and their kids are sleeping and smoke a joint. I'm sure plenty of people do. But I think the different form factors open up to a much wider segment of the market. You can take a little 5 milligram mint, 5 milligrams of THC and 5 milligrams of CBD. You'll have the psychoactive effect of the THC and you'll have the medicinal effect of the CBD. And you can kind of relax on a Friday night, the same as you would having a glass or two of wine. That same person is probably not going to pull out a bong or a pipe and go outside and smoke. So I think it really comes down to convenience and people's comfort level when they think about consuming the product.
So for logistics, this is what's always made me curious, right? The Colorado, Michigan, California are the three major states, and there are more coming on board every day. People predict by 2025 it will be legal in the majority of the states. But for right now, crossing state lines is difficult. I know there are probably regulations. So do you see a lot of cross-state companies, or are companies starting in Michigan and they only serve Michigan, in California and they're only serving California to avoid logistic problems? And if there are logistic problems, is there technology that are helping people? Like UPS probably stays away from it, so does FedEx. But are there companies trying to solve this problem?
Yeah, good question. So there are 33 states with cannabis regulation. So 10 of those are recreational, and then the rest are either just medical or medical and rec. So 33 states total in the U.S., which is a big number. A lot of people don't realize. I mean, Utah and Missouri and I think Michigan and maybe one more state just approved either medical or recreational cannabis in the latest midterms. And so it's a huge issue. And so I think a lot of the bigger companies that you read about, you'll hear are called MSOs or multi-state operators. And it is fully illegal to cross state lines with THC. Hemp CBD is still a little bit gray, but we'll focus on the THC side for now. So yeah, you're setting up individual operations and replicating operations based on the regulations in those states. Each state has a separate regulation. So take Colorado, right? It was obviously the first state to approve recreational cannabis. They require all licensees to be fully vertically integrated. So you have to grow, you have to manufacture and produce your product, you have to distribute it to your retail locations, and you have to have retail locations. And so we personally don't think that's the best model. I think people should, focus on the part of the supply chain that they're good at. And if you're a cultivator and you're a grower, what do you really know about having like a retail focused brand and managing a store? It made it really, really difficult for some people to participate. So California, 39 million people. It's bigger than the country of Canada. I think it's about 35. It's the fifth largest economy in the world. We set up with, I think, about 3 main licenses. So you have a cultivation license, you have production/manufacturing, 4 licenses. You have a distribution license, and then you have retail licenses. There's no restriction on holding all of them. So you could hold all licenses. I think there are a few folks that are fully vertically integrated, but most hold a subset of those 4 licenses.
It sounds like there's an opportunity here for technology like Clerky, but for cannabis businesses, and tons of legal services that can be offered for this. Because as you expand, maybe you don't want to focus. If you already have to focus on things you're not good at, retail, all of that, legal might be something that you can offload to a company. The Clerky is the one I'm familiar with for setting up startups in Delaware. That's really interesting. So I imagine then you wouldn't, because of federal regulation still considers it a controlled substance and so makes it illegal, you couldn't fly with it, and because you can't go across borders, of course. I wonder how that will affect it. Even if all the states legalize it, obviously the air is, what do you, I guess the real question I'm trying to get at is, what do you feel like the federal government will do as more states? And is there any movement on that?
Yeah, so there's a new attorney general, obviously Jeff Sessions, and then Pete Sessions, not related from what I've read. both are no longer in the government, and they're the hugest opponents to federal legalization. My best guess is that they're going to enact something similar to alcohol, which is a states act. And so each state can elect into their own rules. Obviously full removal of THC as a Schedule I narcotic would make it easiest. But to your point, I think you could end up with this web of legalized states that you can cross from, say, California to Nevada because we both are legalized. But then maybe you can't cross through the next state, and you're going to have this weird logistics route to get around. At the end of the day, you're probably, if you're in, Michigan or Rhode Island in the middle of winter here in February, you're going to want to most likely consume, especially if you're smoking flower, Humboldt grown cannabis as opposed to some indoor grown Rhode Island weed. It's totally different. Not saying they don't have good genetics there or good growers. If you can get outdoor cannabis from California to Rhode Island in a legal way, I think that will open up and make things really, really interesting. I think the licensed market is going to stay in the regulatory framework. I don't see CVS or UPS able to go out and get these licenses in addition to their other businesses. It'll also be interesting to see how alcohol is able to play in that too. A lot of money in some of the largest deals have been alcohol companies investing in Canadian companies. I'm assuming to learn the business and then bring those businesses down to the States when the time's right. But it's going to be really interesting to see how federal regulation changes over the next couple of years. I mean, it could be as quick as 6 months, 24 months, or it could be 60 months. You just don't know at this point. We're trying to build the best platform and replicate that platform in the most important, U.S. states when it comes to cannabis market sizes.
It's interesting because, like in Ohio, for example, craft beer, you weren't allowed to have a beer over 7.5%, I think it was, for the longest time in Ohio. And because of that, one of my favorite breweries is up in Michigan, it's Bell's. They couldn't ship my favorite IPA into Ohio because it was a 10% double IPA. It's a very strong beer. It's very good. I wonder if something similar is going to happen in marijuana with THC levels. And going across, state lines, like, hey, you can bring this kind of flower to this state, but not this state, and how that's just going to be a logistical nightmare as states start making it. Ohio's a medical state, but not a recreational state. But things change pretty progressively. So I think next election cycle will probably become recreational here. It'll just be interesting to see what kind of laws get enacted, how they get enacted, and what states, like some of the more regressive states, how they're handling it as well.
Yeah, you look at just the easy example is, and I don't know if you went to Colorado a year ago to now, I don't know when the law was enacted, but you could have a chocolate bar. I don't even know how they packed in this much THC with 150 or 200 milligrams in a Hershey bar. I don't know what your guys' tolerance or use case, but I mean, you have people taking down half of that and consuming 50 milligrams of THC, and they're a non-user or an infrequent user, and they're probably on their way to the hospital thinking they're some massive paranoia. So to your point, California can't have more than 100 milligrams per any single package. And so you'll often see kind of 20 mints with 5 milligrams each, and then you can't have more than 10 milligrams in any one of those mints. So you think about just the logistic changes that you'd have to make on your own end on the production side. If you're going to make them here in California and ship them to Colorado, you'd have to still know and be deeply integrated with the regulatory system of each one of the states. We have super heavy testing restrictions and requirements here in California. So we have to test for THC percent and pesticides and also heavy metals. Those restrictions are actually more restrictive on cannabis than they are on everyday foods that we eat and products that we put in our body and on our body from a topical standpoint, which is pretty crazy. And then you look at Arizona and they have no testing requirements. And so it's just
terrifying.
Yeah, it's just different. I mean, it's basically buying from your black market dealer. And maybe you're like, he has great stuff. Well, awesome. But he's next to a tomato farm and they spray a bunch of pesticides and it blows all over his crop. And now you're lighting the stuff on fire while you ingest it. So I think there needs to be a little bit more standardization. Arizona probably needs to come up a little bit. California needs to back down a little bit. When they throw in their emergency regulations, they're usually, as you can imagine, pretty heavy and restrictive. And as they learn more and we're able to show them how things are actually operating and how it affects the supply chains and where our pain points are, they usually back down a little bit. So we're a big proponent of smart regulation as opposed to deregulation. I think there needs to be something in this market, especially transitioning from the black and gray market now to a licensed market.
Do you see, besides regulation, what are some of the other big challenges that you see?
Regulation is the one. Testing compliance is number two. And these testing labs, I don't know how many are licensed in California. The last number I heard was about 50. If you gave them an identical sample to all 50 labs, you get 50 different answers. And they use different types of testing equipment. Some of the testers, they are used to test food, and now they've transitioned to testing cannabis. Some have been set up just to test cannabis. But it's a formula. Not to get too detailed on the science, but it's not just THC and CBD. There's all these other cannabinoids, and some turn into THC when they're heated up. So it's called winterized oil. You convert all I think it's THCV to THC when it's heated. And so they use a formula and you can come up to different answers. But if you imagine as a product owner and a brand owner, we want certain products to be 20 to 25% THC on flower. Well, there was one lab that told us we never test flower over 20%. We're like, okay, we're not going to use you to test flower anymore. We go to this other lab and they'll test something at 22 in R&D test results. And so the cultivator will show us a lab test result at 22%. We'll go to that same lab and they'll test it at 15. How is this possible, right? So now we paid for a flower that we thought was 22%. We're trying to put it through a premium brand at 15%. And you look apples to apples, the market still buys based on price and potency. So there's some brand recognition. Just people realize quality or consistent experience. But at the end of the day, if you have something that's worth $55 at 15% versus something that's $55 at 19%, you're probably going to buy the higher potency, even though the most experienced smokers wouldn't even feel the difference. It's still right in your face as you're making that buying decision.
It's actually, just hearing you talk about this just shows how big of an opportunity this is. We've talked about 5 or 6 problems, standardized lab testing that can be solved by a startup, right? Logistical thing, shipping, right? When it is possible to go cross-border, like what does that look like? That's another startup idea, right? There are probably 3 or 4, I won't say $100 million a year revenue businesses, but there's certainly probably 10 to $100 million opportunities, each one of these that you could just build and solve for people. They don't, there's no business in creating your own lab to do it. And so you could offload these services and software can help.
That's an interesting transition. Like maybe you could talk about the state of tech in the cannabis industry. Like what do you see that's like active, and what do you find interesting that's going on?
Yeah, so it's I come from an enterprise technology background, as you guys know, venture capital side, and it's been really tough. It is super early in this life cycle. But at the end of the day, I look at cannabis as should be a standard supply chain. We're selling into dispensaries. You have someone growing, right? So you look at the different pieces of the business, and it shouldn't be net new software that has to be used. And so people are coming up with cannabis ERPs and cannabis point of sale systems, and it blows my mind. It makes no sense to me, and we're probably gonna utilize one of them because you almost have to. We can't be using an Oracle or an SAP or something else like that just because it's way too heavy for the size of our business. Again, we're restricted to one state, so we have to roll this out into every single state. And so the current software out there is really bad. I think it's starting to get better. What I would love for someone to do is pull together the different pieces into a suite and have a menu and be like, I am, I'm a cultivator and a producer and manufacturer and distributor of products. And I can select from that, and whether it's built off NetSuite or Microsoft or Oracle or anything else, something that is traditional software that's tailored towards cannabis would just totally crush it right now. So it's been really challenging on the technology side. It's hard to get, data that's up to date. And so you have a couple of startups that, are funded, but not well funded, not moving super fast, that are focused on it. The interesting part is I just met with IBM yesterday, and they actually were pretty well versed in the different types of players in this market and how the supply chain works. And we're working through the pain points that we experience. And then they were kind of wrapping it back into blockchain as well. So one of the big things is called Metric, METRC. And it's a tracking system for the state of California, the Bureau of Cannabis Control. And it tracks from seed to smoke, essentially, seed to sale. And so we will have to have our systems integrate with that. And I know IBM is looking at deploying the blockchain for looking at Metric as well. So there's a ton of meat on this bone from a technology side.
So we saw this with Salesforce, retail or commercial real estate. There's a huge module that gets deployed on top of Salesforce, like a package that you can buy, turns Salesforce into a commercial real estate management system. And it's almost completely different from a sales perspective. And I'm sure you could build the same package for cannabis sales. And then, NetSuite as well. You'd probably be able to build a custom package on top of that. I'm curious to see when a acquisition happens. Oracle, obviously one of the most acquisitive companies in the world, they probably already look at it and say, when's the opportunity big enough to pull the trigger on buying one of these systems and integrating it into NetSuite, or SAP even might do it. I actually shocked SAP hasn't, being a German company. Seems like something they could have already done and got a great system that they could already deploy to many of their customers and the countries they operate in, along with then being able to deploy it in the United States in a few years. Seems like a great advantage they could get. Yeah,
I mean, it just kind of lends to the legitimacy of the market that these people are going to start thinking about it. I've already started thinking about it, but just recreating the wheel for cannabis. It could be tomatoes or mangoes or anything else. It really just needs to be standardized, and I don't think you need to recreate ERP or POS systems. And there's been a couple other companies out there applying their software. I've met with one company that helps link distributors on the beauty side to salons. And you look at it, it's kind of a perfect analogy for us as a producer, manufacturer, and brand owner. We're selling into dispensaries, but at the end of the day, I don't have any insight into how fast my product's selling, any automatic tags on when we should be, reordering or what's not moving, so that we can go in and run some demos and promos to help move some product. It's just a very immature supply chain, how we buy product and how we sell it. And then when we think we need to be reordering, it's super labor intensive right now, and all problems that I'm sure industries have had and then solved with technology.
I'm sure, I think what you're describing is it's more that the consumer side and consumer facing applications are way further along than the infrastructure. So do you see anything interesting, like you mentioned a few PO systems, but I'm just curious, I would imagine that you'd want to see all of this infrastructure come up at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, what I told IBM yesterday was, blockchain, I get it. That sounds great. It makes a ton of sense. It's a little bit more difficult, and you have all these inputs. And if you think about, you grow a flower, you harvest the flower, you cut off the buds, you take the trim and the whole flower, and then that gets extracted into oil. So you're going to have to kind of have this one-to-many relationship, starting with one plant and then becoming, different products. So, I think the blockchain can be helpful, but it's going to be sucking information out of various different systems. So I told them, you should just package together these systems. I'm sure you have an ERP that you can put in here that's lighter weight than the really big ones, and POS software, and you can kind of have this end-to-end solution. and or you could integrate right into any of these other systems as well. And so someone's going to tackle this in a clever way that isn't totally recreating the wheel or kind of a patchwork of a bunch of different systems. And you can then be selling it to the state, which kind of guaranteed revenue. You're not going to get displaced very often. And then with vertical integration in some of these states, you'll be able to sell the entire suite of products. The analytics that we're not able to get right now drives me pretty insane. Just can't even walk in with a live menu a lot of the time to your dispensaries. And so we're taking down orders and manually entering those. Just really simple things need to get fixed in this industry. And, they're moving that direction. The people that are regulated, we're again 100% compliant organization, so we can only sell to licensed dispensaries. They want to do this better. They need to improve. They need to attract a strong, loyal customer base. But it takes time and money to make those transitions. So I think any way to make that really simple and seamless. I know it's not always great as a technology company to build a consulting organization, but I think there's a lot of value to be had there if you're able to crack that nut.
You mentioned like a few startups. They're not growing as fast as you'd like them to be. What is like the state of the venture community? Do they have an appetite to, pour in money to some of these startups to accelerate some of the development?
So Eaze is the most well-known one. EAZE. They are the software to empower, distribution companies essentially to set up a depot, an Eaze depot, and then they put product into the trunk of cars and they send those cars out, and as orders come up, I think they, kind of an on-demand delivery of cannabis. And so there are some traditional VC investors in those into Eaze. At the end of the day, I don't know how. I think the majority of the money is probably flowing into Canada or private investors, high net worth family offices that are investing in cannabis products. But I think if you're a traditional venture or private equity fund and you've got CalPERS in your LP base, or some sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, you're going to get slaughtered if you try to touch this market. They have some pretty restrictive covenants on where the money can be put, and so it's going to be slow. I think it's going to take a lot of time. I don't look at those kind of VC or PE channels as being a big source of capital for the near term. I think that will change. I think a lot of people are looking at how to play in this market. And if you're going to make a bet, like where do you bet? Are you going to invest in Canada? Are you going to try to find some private investments? The Canadian Stock Exchange has a ton of companies on it now in the cannabis side. But it's the Wild West. I still look at this as the warm up. We're not even in the first inning, really, even though things seem like they're moving fast and are premature. It's still really, really early, and as regulation changes, it's going to be really interesting what traditional companies take the risk to jump into the space and what their comfort level is.
So one of the most conservative industries on the planet is the credit card industry, right? We can all talk about that if you've ever had e-commerce problems. But you've seen companies like Stripe and Square. Square is a very popular small business point of sale system nowadays. Is that a problem? And if it is, are people just accepting cash now? Or do credit card companies are kind of looking the other way and they don't, what they don't know can't hurt them kind of thing?
No, the big banks and Visa, MasterCard and the rails that they run on are highly sensitive to cannabis companies. I think you can get away with it for a little bit, being like a health and wellness company, but as soon as they peek under the hood, they figure it out pretty quick. A lot of these companies just operate unbanked, and it's super dangerous and inefficient and expensive. There are state chartered credit unions that you can work with on the THC side. So we're lucky enough to have a good relationship with banks. So we're able to make cash deposits into the Fed and not have to hold on to a lot of cash, but it's a huge issue. I've seen a couple companies pushing the limits, looking like the PayPal of cannabis. Not sure how legal they are, and I know they're not getting a lot of traction. I just think people are a little bit uncomfortable with it. So it's a bad experience. As a consumer, you walk into a dispensary and, if you don't have cash, you're going up to a little ATM, pulling cash out and making your purchase. So, not terrible for the consumer because it's a little bit normal, but as a business, you're beholden to your cash flow and no ability to access credit. And so you think about setting up a store, you probably need $500 to $1 million worth of just product to open your store. And so you're having to raise money to be able to go do that. And so I think you can have a bank account up for that, but pretty soon you're going to get that shut down at the end of the day, and you're running cash. So our drivers have safes bolted into our vehicles, one-way access only, so you can only put money in, comes back, gets counted and put into the safe. So it's super labor intensive. And again, we're driving around in a white unmarked vehicle to a dispensary. So it's pretty easy for someone to just sit out there. Some of these big dispensaries, they're getting 8 deliveries a day from all their different brands. And a lot of brands are self-distributed. So it's a pain, and just the safety aspect is pretty bad.
So they're paying their employees in cash, right? Like, it's probably, I imagine the amount of untaxable income on this is insane, because if I'm going to collect cash, then probably not recording it in a computer system. And I'm just going to pay my employees $80 a day or whatever it is for minimum wage, or however, how much they pay. That's insane to me that we built a system around that, because that's probably, I don't know, $10 million easy a year in taxable income that just goes off the map.
Yeah, that, and you get the code section 280E. You only are able to deduct above the line expenses. So revenue minus COGS, you get taxed on that amount since it's considered an illegal business in the eyes of the Fed, so the IRS. And so you can have 25 EBITDA margins and zero on your net income. So it's pretty painful. You look at the next 12 to 24 months, the most well-funded companies and the ones who are able to grow are going to stick around, and you're going to have this long tail of companies that might be good brands, good stores that are going to end up falling off just because it's really challenging to raise money. And you can be running a good organization, but then at the end of the day, you get slammed with this tax bill that will, it shuts the doors for sure.
I mean, I find this so interesting that it's one of those industries where tech has not caught up to it, and it may not accelerate anytime soon.
Yeah, I think it's going to need some changes on the regulatory side and on the federal side for people to really, especially established companies, jump in and want to focus on this area. I still see really good talent that wants to work in here. Stanford MBAs, Yale MBAs, people are interested and curious, and I think are getting more and more comfortable with the industry. In my mind, it's a hard trend that some sort of federal regulation change is going to have to happen. And it's just a matter of time.
One of the things we always like to end with is kind of the things that you see looking forward. I know we talked about a lot of infrastructure, and regulation. Is there something that maybe people are not kind of keeping their eye on that you're kind of excited about?
Yeah, I think on the product side, people are really starting to focus on the science of cannabis as a plant. And I don't know the latest number, but there's over 100 cannabinoids in the plant. THC and CBD are 2 of them. I think they have great properties. But you can start isolating and purifying some of these other cannabinoids, and really, the testing is still pretty surface, right? It's mostly user testing, but you can start targeting sleep or pain or appetite suppressant, to name a few. And I think the products that start coming out that are the most interesting that we're going to focus on and feed through our brands are some of these really interesting minor cannabinoids in the plant. And so I think you're going to see more on the science side in 2019 start popping through than just I want to get high. Well, it's really easy just to get high, but if you have some specific ailment or you want a specific effect, I think that's going to get further and further dialed in 2019, which will be interesting. I also think on the business side, there's just going to be a lot of consolidation. There's going to be people that are able to raise and grow, and interesting, brands or form factors or whatnot are going to have to join a platform. Like I said, most people are self-distributed, and it makes it hard for a business. It's expensive for other businesses. And if you want to create products and produce products and have a good brand, but don't want to deal with the rest of the business, there's going to be a lot of consolidation within, under kind of those 4 license categories I talked about before.
So you're talking about medicine here. What is Big Pharma's role in all this? I mean, where are they? I mean, I'm sure they're looking at this like, hey, this is something that might encroach our space here.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. You read some of these articles about the amount of money they spend on lobbying against federal legalization of cannabis. I'm assuming they all have research and development programs in the background, so they're speaking out of both sides of their mouths, but they're going to jump in big at some point. It's still unclear to me whether it's big pharma or big alcohol that's going to jump in the most. You can see a lot of the money has come from big alcohol so far, but if you look at drinking rates, and it's down. So I don't know if it's a new generation or people have access to cannabis. It's hard to tell what the answer is, but I think they're being hurt probably the most. But the people that can benefit the most will be from the opioid side for sure. So I think large pharma is going to have to pay attention to it at some point, and are not going to be able to stop the growth of cannabis, and are going to have to enter and want to own part of that supply chain at some point. Novartis signed a deal with Tilray on the medical cannabis side, but I don't know when another player would really jump in and want to say this is a good alternative to opioids. I just think it's too profitable for them at this point.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.